Welcome everybody. Today we are going to be talking about a lot of things. We're going to be talking about how classes interact with each other. We're going to be talking about default constructors, the hidden this within classes, destructors, as well as we'll introduce the idea of pointers to you. So to get us started, let us first kind of jump into our file system here. You're going to see 5 files here at the top. If you just want to download these already fleshed out, you can find them at makethingswithcpp.com. It's going to be under lesson 7. And generally what we're going to be building here is we're going to be interacting between classes, and one of our classes are going to be like points on a graph, like x and y coordinates. If you can envision, like from geometry class or algebra or something like that, it's just going to be points on a graph. And with those points, we're going to put them into a plot later on. So that's what we're building here. And to get us started, let us first start talking about constructors again. Now, in our last talk, we spoke about how when we want to create a new member, when we want to instantiate an object of a class, we want to just be able to do it nice and easy and just pass the variables to it that we want it to have. So if we look here, our point class only has 2 private member variables, and those are the x, y coordinates, and we want to construct a new member just by passing it x and y. So here in our main function, if we just wanted to create a new point, we would just do something like this. We would say point, new point, and then we would give it x, y coordinates. Let's just say it's at 8, -5, something like that. And so then it would be on the graph at this point. So how we are going to define this here is with the this operator. So whenever we pass the variable with a different name, we don't need to do this. So like say I put x coord here and y coord. So we want to assign the x coordinate to x and the y coordinate to y, so we would just say x is equal to x coord and y is equal to y coord. So that's what you do if you have constructor variables that are different than the actual class member variables, like if the name is different. But say this was x and this was y, just to keep things simple, make it more readable so you just knew what was happening going in. You couldn't do this. You'd actually get an error. So instead you actually need to use the this to signify that this member x is equal to x and this member y is equal to y. Otherwise, this is kind of abstracted. It's hidden. You don't need to put this in if you have a different name for your parameters when you're creating your constructor. Alright, so that's the hidden this. So it only needs to become visible if you use the same parameters in your constructor as are the names of the member variables in your class. So there's that. I'd now like to talk about default constructors, which are another type of constructor where you would basically make an object. You would instantiate a new member of a class, but you don't know yet what you want to pass as the variable. So imagine that we know that we needed a point on our graph, but we didn't know yet what the x and y coordinates were, but we just know that we need a point. So how we would create this is we would basically just create a variable, point, and we'll just say some point, and we're going to make sure that whenever we do this, whenever we create any sort of point, that it sets it to 0, 0. So it's going to set it to the index of our graph. So we go into our HPP file and we would just say this x is equal to 0, this y is equal to 0. And so you'll see when we get into like more complicated classes, say again as our bank account as an example, imagine that we needed a new bank account, we needed a new member of that class, but we didn't know our customer's name yet. We didn't know how much money they were going to give us to put in that account, but we still needed something to work with. That is why we use default constructors, because they give us something immediately which we can work with later. And again, the difference between how you would create a constructor where we do know the values we want to pass and a default constructor where we don't is we basically kind of call it like a function when we know it. So let's say known xy, and we'll say this one's at 1, 1, but we don't know the points for this one, and so we create it. The points would be at 0, 0 for this one. Okay, easy enough. Default constructors. Okay, so with our point class, we want to create a few more functions for it. So we're just going to use these accessor functions, these getters again. So we're just going to get the x coordinate. So just get x, double get y. And that word that I just used, accessor, these getters, this is just a very common function for most classes. You just need to know what the name of that variable is. So yeah, they're just called getters or accessors. And we also want a function for getting the distance between two different points. So we will basically code out the distance formula. You may have used that in geometry. And when we use this, we're going to use pointers again. So I introduced just to pointers in our last video. We are going to actually use the address of another point on the graph that we're using. We're not going to make a copy of it. We're going to use that actual reference to the first point. So let's go ahead and put that as well. Say point. And again, we denote the pointer with the asterisk or the star. Again, that's the little symbol above the number 8 on your keyboard. Alright, so this is our forward declaration of our class, of our point class here. And we need to flesh it out in the CPP file. So I'm going to copy and paste these functions into CPP. And we need to link up these files again. So CPP doesn't know yet that it's hooked up to HPP, so we need to make sure that we include that. Very good. And then when we are defining our class member functions here, we need to make sure that we have the prefix of point, the class name in front of it, as well as the colon colon. So we have get x, which just returns x. And then the same for y. Just returns y. So let me very quickly take a look at the distance formula so I can code that out. I've got it up here in a window. And you'd think I would remember this. Seems pretty easy. So we take the x minus x, y minus y, and square them both, square root of the whole thing. Okay, so to accomplish this, we're going to need to use the math library. Make sure you include that, math.h. It's going to have two functions within it, the pow function as well as the, which is like raising things to a power, as well as the square root function. So to do this, we're going to need to say this x minus, and we're usually going to say point x, right? So we're passing in a point. This is, you could think this is point A and point B, so we're passing in point B, and we want to retrieve the x value from point B. And in the past we've been doing this with dot notation, but it's a little different with pointers. We actually use the directional sign, we use this arrow again to access the variable of a pointer. So passing in a second pointer to a point, and we're accessing its variable with this arrow. So we need to square this. Again, we do that with the POW function, and then we say the degree that we need to raise it to. So we want to square it, so we put 2. If we wanted to cube it, we put 3, and on and on. So there's that, and then we do the same with x, or I'm sorry, we do the same with y. So let's just copy and paste that. Say this y minus point y squared, add them together, and then once they're added together, we find the square root of it. Easy enough. And so we'll set this to a variable. We'll say call it a double, and we'll say it's the dist. And then we'll just return dist. Easy enough. So let's go ahead and test everything here. We want to find the distance between 2 points on our graph, so we'll just say point, and we'll have point A, and we're not going to pass it anything, so this is going to use our default constructor, and it's going to make the x and y coordinates at 0, 0. Again, just to show you that, what it looks like again, our default constructor, just pass it 0, 0. That's if we don't pass it any arguments. Now in our second one, point B, we are going to pass it some arguments. We're going to put it at, let's say, it's going to be x, it's going to be 0, 3. And the reason I'm doing that is just so we can very easily find the distance with our formula. It should just be a distance of 3. So let's say dist AB is going to be equal to, it's going to be double. It's going to be equal to the distance from point A to point B. And so when we're calling this, again, since it's a pointer, we need to pass the address, and we do that by making sure that we include this ampersand sign. That way it doesn't make a copy. So we'll say ampersand point B, and then we'll just output that to the user just to see if we got it right. Okay, so let's go ahead and build and run this and see how we did. Pops right up there, and it says distance from A to B is 3. Nice. So we know that we are fine so far. Awesome. So now that we are finished with that, we are going to build out our plot class as well, and then we're going to hook up these two classes and have them communicate with each other. So I will save that for the next video. You can go ahead and hop on over to that. For deeper learning on C++, visit us at makethingswithcpp.com and be sure to like and subscribe.